Really appreciate your time. Before we get started, I just wanted to do the acknowledgement of country. So I want to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands and waterways where I'm located. So I'm located in the Toowoomba region. It's the Guyabal and Jarawar peoples. And I want to pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and to also acknowledge that these lands and waterways were never ceded. So my name is Melissa Forbes, and I am a early career research and development chair. It's a bit of a mouthful for the Australian Music and Psychology Society. And I'm very pleased today to be talking about this topic of networking for HDRs and ECRs, a structure and strategies to get you started. So hoping that this is really practically useful for you today. So I am Associate Professor in Contemporary Singing at the University of Southern Queensland, and I welcome any colleagues from USQ here today. Really pleased to have you. Whilst this is part of our Amplify Your Research series for AMPS, the Australian Music and Psychology Society, the information that I share with you today is entirely generic and will be applicable to anyone who's undertaking a HDR degree or who is indeed ECR or early career researcher. So I got to put my hand up to talk about this topic when we were planning our series, because it dawned upon me that I've actually rebuilt my own professional networks a number of times over in my life as a result of pretty significant career changes. So I feel like I've kind of intuitively felt my way through building and sustaining professional networks in a range of different contexts, including the corporate world, in music performance, and now in academic research as well. So it is a topic that I find personally quite interesting, but one that I understand is also really challenging for people. The other reason that I put my hand up for this particular topic was that I am at a regional university in Australia. So, you know, we're a smaller sized university. And because my area of research, which is the everyday uses of music and singing to help us feel good, there aren't many people here, or any people, who are directly aligned with my research interests. So I have found that it's been really, really important for me to have a really outward focus to build particularly my disciplinary networks. So we're going to talk about the different types of networks that you have as an early career researcher or HDR student, and how we can kind of manage each one of those different types of the network that you have. All right, so before we get into the nitty-gritty of the presentation, I wanted to play a quick little game. And you're probably not old enough to remember a show called Sale of the Century, but this was a show that was really huge in the 80s when I was growing up. And they would always have this segment, so it's a kind of quiz show where people get asked questions, and they always have this section called Who Am I? And they would ask a range of questions, and then you'd kind of have to hit the buzzer to say, it's so-and-so, okay? And this is just a little way for me to introduce a networking story for you from my own personal experience. So I have a photo of this person on the screen, and I'm going to ask a few questions. Now, if there's anyone who actually can answer this, please feel free to put your hand up. But I'm saying at the outset that you definitely know who that person is on the screen, okay? So I'm an Australian singer and entertainer, and I was born in Mackay, and I went to the Queensland Conservatorium and I studied jazz singing. I'm a piano player. I moved to New York and lived in New York for 20 years pursuing a performing career, and I've recorded several albums. Does anyone know who this person is yet? I'm not seeing any hands going up. Okay. I moved back to Australia when COVID hit, and I now live up in the Whitsundays. And I recently wrote an entire kind of almost an opera around Julia Gillard's misogyny speech. Anyone know who this is? Just remember, I said you definitely know who this is. Okay, I'm not seeing any takers. So This person on your screen is actually the voice of Siri. So her name is Karen Jacobson, and she is Australian, and she's all of those things that I just told you. But Karen and I have become really good buddies, I guess. And this is all through what I can see now is really kind of subtle forms of networking. So how Karen and I got to know each other was that I had written a book chapter about sexism in jazz singing, effectively. And I posted about it on Twitter, and Karen saw my post and sent me a direct message saying, I love what you've written here. This resonates so much with my own personal experience as a singer. And that kind of started a conversation between us. And we were just going back and forth with messages and stuff like that over time. And over time, it came out that her parents actually live in Toowoomba, which is where I'm located. I mean, what are the chances of that? Toowoomba's not New York, it's pretty small. Anyway, she said, look, next time I'm down in Toowoomba visiting my folks, we should have a coffee. And so that's what we did. And then we got to talking about a whole range of things. And of course, because Karen has had this very, very rare experience of being the voice in literally millions, perhaps billions of devices across the world, that got my research brain thinking. And of course, I'm thinking this would be an amazing research project. And so as it turns out, her and I are actually working on a research project together around artificial intelligence and the voice. So that's just one example from my own experience of how from little things, bigger things can really grow. And so what we're going to look at today is the structure of your network, and we're going to look at some strategies around how you can kind of massage each part of your network, and then I'm really going to encourage you to get started. First of all, I think it's amazing that anyone showed up to this talk because networking is one of those topics that most people go, oh, no, I just can't stand the idea. I hate networking. I don't want to walk into a room and have to, rock up to people I don't know and talk to them. We're not really going to be talking about that today. When people think about the word networking, we often think of, walking into a room of strangers and somehow having to leave with like a fistful of business cards and connects and all that kind of thing. But don't think about networking with all of those kind of icky connotations. I'm really trying to encourage you to think differently about networking. So the big message from today is that I want you to consider networking as building relationships. Let's not even use the N word anymore, right? It's about building relationships. It's not about transactions. And I think that's what some people kind of find uncomfortable when we talk about networking. We feel like we're going into a situation where we're trying to get something from somebody. Let's forget that way of thinking about networking entirely. So there's an executive coach called Tom Henschel, and I've used a few of his ideas in our presentation today, and I love what he says about it. He says that networking is about planting seeds. It's not about hunting down prey, right? It's about building something. It's not about trying to take what you can get from other people. And every professional interaction that you have is effectively building your network. And here's another really important point that I really want you to get. By the time you need a relationship, it's too late to build one, okay? So you need to build relationships consistently right from the outset from your career so that down the track, when you get to a certain juncture and you need assistance with something, you actually have a range of people that you can draw on. So by the time you need a relationship, it's too late to build one. So that's why I'm really going to be encouraging you to think about this and start acting on this today. Quite often people give the advice of making cold calls when you need something. Just reach out to someone and ask, and what's the worst that can happen? They might say no, and that's the worst that can happen. I'm going to show you why I don't think that's actually a really good idea at all. I think it's much better to be in a position of not having to cold call people, but to have relationships so that when you need help with something, you have any number of people that you can reach out to. So what we're going to cover as I said, is first we're going to look at the structure of an academics network. Then I'm going to give you some concrete strategies that you can try. Feel free to take or leave any of those, okay? And then I'm really going to encourage you to start building these relationships as soon as possible. So structure, strategies, and start. Okay, so we're thinking about networking as relationships, and we're now going to look at a structured way of approaching those relationships and the ones that we need to build. So this is literally stolen, like a lot of this stuff in my presentation is. It's from Lolene Birdahl's Academia Made Easy. She's a fantastic Canadian academic. She writes on all sorts of issues around having a really great, meaningful academic career. Highly recommend that you follow her on social media or subscribe to her Substack. I love her stuff. I find it super, super useful. And so this diagram is from Lolene, and she says that building your network is all about strengthening relationships. You want to move people closer to the center where you have these close ties. When you meet someone and make enough of a connection that they will remember you in the future, they move from the outer, no ties, closer into the center. And so we're constantly trying to kind of move people into that center close ties section. When you get to know someone over time to the point where you're friendly with them, they move from, the middle weak ties into the close ties. And I think, looking back on the various networks that I've kind of created throughout my professional working life, I have, worked in the corporate sector where I still actually have those relationships, but they've kind of transcended the work context, and they're now more, lifelong friends, for example. So I'll say it again because this is a really important thing. The point of networking is to establish these relationships in key areas before you need them, okay? So in terms of the institutional segment of Lolene's diagram there, we're thinking about our immediate colleagues or our immediate peers. So I'm going to be talking mostly about people who are in an institutional context in some way. So you might be enrolled in a PhD, for example, or you might be working as a casual academic, or you might actually have an ongoing or a fixed term role as an academic. So in your institution, you've got your immediate colleagues in your discipline, you've got support, professional staff, you've got colleagues in other schools, committee members, all that sort of thing. These are all important people to foster really healthy, positive working relationships with. Committees are a really great way to meet people from other parts of the university. And this is actually something that I think is important when you're really thinking of trying to advance your career. So when you're looking for promotion and that kind of thing, it is actually really useful to know a range of people from across the university, because you get to understand how the institution ticks, and you get to understand how to be strategic in a lot of the things that you do. But I will say one caveat in terms of being involved on committees for the purpose of building your network, and that is that sometimes they can really be a massive time suck. So you have to be really strategic about the types of committees that you want to join, because they have to somehow help you build your network and help build those relationships, but they also have to somehow help you in your career. They have to give you something that you can show you've demonstrated leadership, for example, in being in a committee. I think a lot of the advice that gets bandied about is, do everything, be on all the committees, do all of the things. But in my experience, you are much better off being more strategic about those types of connections, all right? So, yeah, many of these relationships are really strategic, particularly if you're looking to kind of progress through the academic system. I find that these types of connections are less useful for your research networks, unless you're working in a large institution where you might be part of a lab, for example. One key network, institutionally speaking, is your peers. So when we think of networking, we often think I want to connect with that person who's up the ladder, or, you know, who's further progressed in their career than I am. But again, I really want to impress upon you that anyone who's studying with you, for example, doing their PhD, try as much as you can to make connection with those people. Those other people are super, super helpful in terms of support. And I know at our university, for example, we have quite an active early career researcher network, which has been very helpful to a number of people that I know personally in terms of the support, the guidance, and just not feeling alone. So that's another really important set of relationships that I really encourage you to think about developing. Let's think about disciplinary relationships. So these are people who work in the same field as you are, but they're not at other institutions. So I think this is where professional associations like AMPS, the Australian Music Psychology Society, for example, the society that's hosting this presentation, it's where these types of associations they become really, really important. For someone like me, because of the context that I work in at a regional university where there's no one doing this type of research, AMPS has been immensely important to me to connect me with other people who are researching in the field, both nationally and internationally. So it's never too early to be in a professional society like AMPS or whatever the equivalent is in the field that you're researching. And rather than just kind of sign up and be on the books, I would really encourage you, even as ECRs and HDRs, to become as involved as you possibly can in those associations, because you make amazing connections through professional societies. So I'm a member of a whole range of different societies and associations, the National Singers Teachers Association, similar network in the USA. I'm part of the Singing for Health network in the UK. ESCOM and AMPS, of course, are very familiar to our members in this society. There are educational societies. There's a whole range of associations, and each has their own kind of unique network that you can tap into. What I really love about AMPS, though, is that it does have this focus on supporting HDRs and ECRs, and I think that's really laudable and really important. So I'm very glad to be a part of that, because these relationships, you can take them through your entire career. They're really, really important. And then finally, we get to the external segment of our network. And these are people who are working outside academia in areas that are going to touch on your work. So, you know, granting agencies, funding agencies, government, media, industry, not-for-profit, all of those types of things. These are often going to be really key to disseminating your research and for your ability to demonstrate that your research has engagement and impact. So how do you meet these people? Well, your disciplinary networks will often be a really important go-between. And what I've found is another really important conduit to industry and external stakeholders, and building those networks are research centres. So at our institution, we have the Centre for Heritage and Culture, for example, which I'm a member of, and I have met a whole range of people through my association with that centre that I would never have access to otherwise. So if you're not affiliated with a research centre at the institution that you're currently enrolled in or working at, I would highly encourage you to suss that out. If you aren't affiliated with an institution at all, that doesn't prevent you from joining a research centre. Many research centres will take people on as adjuncts. If you contact them and give them your CV and express interest, you may well be able to join a research centre as an adjunct member. So there's a few ideas there in terms of building those external networks. Media contacts are another really important one for getting your work out there and raising your profile. And oftentimes your institution can plug you into those networks, but you can make these contacts yourself. One thing I've learned with working particularly with people in radio a lot over the years, so when I was actually performing, I used to, you know, work with people like Richard Feidler from ABC in Brisbane a lot. And what I learned was that people in radio need content, and they need it all the time. Like, it never stops, right? They always need people to come on and talk about things, or have regular spots where they talk about particular topics. So, you could go to your local ABC and pitch a regular spot where you talk about a particular thing that's relevant to your research. Of course, it's got to be something that's broadly of interest to the public. But I think there's a lot of opportunities there too for you to go out and actually make those connections yourself. Okay, I'm not going to talk any more about the actual structure of the network. We've looked at how we can build our relationships in the disciplinary area, externally and institutionally. And now we want to move to some concrete strategies on how to actually kind of operationalize all of this. Okay, so here's some really important things that I got from Ruth Gotian, who wrote a book called The Success Factor. And that book is about high-performing individuals. And one of the indicators of high-performing individuals is their ability to build relationships and also their ability to connect other people. And we're going to talk about that as part of networking activity a little bit later. So, rather than approaching these relationships in our network, building these relationships as a kind of transaction or what's in it for me, always be thinking, what can I offer to that person? Say you've come across someone's work and you think, I just really love what they do. I'd love to be on their radar. I'd love for them to know who I am, and to kind of bring them closer into my inner circle. What can you do? Well, my advice, and this is also the advice of Ruth Gotian, is don't just reach out to people with a cold call. So start any conversation without asking for something, right? So what a lot of people will do is they'll say, oh, I really love what you do. Can I have like half an hour of your time so I can tell you about my research? So that's, it's actually quite a big ask for some busy people. So the advice is just reach out to someone and tell them how much you appreciate and respect their work and that it resonates with you in some way. And that means the conversation has started. So try not to, put an ask in that initial kind of contact. That usually will get the conversation going. And so as that conversation proceeds, then you can make it clear to that person what you might have to offer them, okay? So rather than thinking what you can get from them, think about what you can offer. And so oftentimes in the research space, that's going to be things like methodological expertise, or it might even be that, you're an absolute guru with social media and how to disseminate stuff in a really interesting way. You'll always have something that you're going to be able to offer that other person. So one thing that's really important here is be prepared and know what it is that you have to offer other people. Like I said earlier, don't get caught up in hierarchies. Don't worry if someone is at the top of their field, but also similarly, don't worry about, the fact that someone might be at your level or even less progressed than you are. Everybody has something to offer, and we need to, just be always other focused in terms of what it is that we can actually offer to that person. I want to give you an example of how I think I've actually done this myself. So I'm on Twitter and I've found it to be very useful in terms of making connections. There is a researcher who I follow who's based at QUT, and this person has done some really amazing things in the creative arts space, and I really admire how she has managed to attract so much funding for the work that she's done. And she does really important, impactful work, particularly in nursing homes and things like that. So I've been following her research with interest, but I've been engaging with the information that she posts on social media. I've been following it up. I've been reading articles that she's posted. I actually bought a book of hers. And, if I do that, I'll let that person know that I've actually taken them up on looking into their work in more detail. And I've done that over a period of time. And then a while ago, I was writing a funding application, and the university said, look, we don't have any money to pay anyone to review this. So everybody who's writing an application is just going to have to tap someone on the shoulder and ask them if they can have a look at your application. And I was thinking, okay, who can I tap on the shoulder here? And this is where the fact that I had kind of built a relationship was actually really useful, because I thought, this person that I've been following all this time would actually be the ideal person to have a look at my application. Now, bear in mind, I haven't actually met this person before, but I have been quite engaged in their work. And so I sent her an email and I said, look, I'd love for you just to have a look at my first page. Tell me what you think. When she received that email, she would recognize my name because, you know, we've had interactions on social media. And her response was, absolutely, I've got 15 minutes here in my diary. She gave me a whole bunch of times and she said, you can call me on my mobile and let's talk about it. And I was really stoked with that outcome because she's just a really great person to get input from. But I think it was partly because I had kind of built that relationship over time and I was genuinely interested in the research that she does, and I genuinely respect what she does. So this strategy, I guess, is really about your mindset. You know, let's move past that kind of transactional way of thinking about networking and really think about it more in a service way. Is, you know, what can I offer that person and how can I support that person and support what they're doing so that we're building a really positive relationship, so that when I get to a point where I actually need their advice, they're going to be really happy to give it. This is another strategy. This is from a guy called Andy Lopato, who's a professional relationships and networking expert. And it's the 24/7/30 strategy. Now, for some people, this might seem a little bit too calculated, you know, so take it or leave it. But I've actually used this and I think it's quite effective. So the idea is, if you meet someone new who is not part of your network and you really like what they do, you like the cut of their jib, you know, you think, I really want to kind of stay in contact with this person. I think this person does some really interesting stuff and I think that I could actually offer them some things as well. If you meet a person like that, within 24 hours, follow up. So say you met them at a conference and the next day you would write them an email and say, hey, I thought your presentation was amazing. I got this out of it and I find that there are synergies with my own research, you know. So you just kind of put yourself on their radar. And then within 7 days, and that usually is going to start a conversation, okay? There's usually going to be some kind of back and forth there. And then within about a week, you go back and say, hey, you know, just wanted to say again how great it was. Here's a really interesting article that I just found that I thought you might find interesting, or something like that. And then you follow them up in another 30 days or around a month. And that way you're just building that kind of conversations momentum over time. And I have actually done this with somebody just recently. So someone reached out to me from the UK and said, I'd love to meet you and talk about your research. And I was really thrilled to meet with this person. We had a very good conversation. Then we had talked about a range of publications, and one particular article that I had written, this person wasn't familiar with. So that gave me the opportunity to follow up within 24 hours to say, hey, I note that you hadn't read this, but here it is if you want to have a read. And then within a week, I actually contacted them again because I had a survey that I needed people to complete. And I thought, well, actually, this person would be really good. And so, you know, you can see I'm just kind of slowly building that relationship with that person and bringing them closer into that kind of inner close ties part of our network over time. Okay, so just looking at the time, I have to race through my slides here because I do want to have some time to actually talk to you guys. I suppose in terms of like the more traditional networking, you know, we talked at the beginning about walking into a room, say if you're at a conference and you're there by yourself. Sometimes that can be really awkward, right? You're just not really sure how to get in and actually interact with people who you've never met. Sometimes, you know, you could be overseas and it can be quite intimidating to, you know, kind of build connections in that space. So I thought these were actually pretty cute, some of these conversation starters. And having these things in your back pocket, again, means that, like, if you do have to walk into a room where you're at an international conference and you don't know anybody, you feel a little bit more prepared to actually, you know, talk to somebody that you've never spoken to before but you have a way to get started. So if you're at a conference, for example, and someone has presented, you could certainly, and this is very normal and natural, go up to them and say, hey, I really loved your presentation. I particularly loved the part where you talked about this. And then I think it's always really useful to try and somehow weave in what it is that you're looking at, or what it is that you're researching, so that they become aware that there is some kind of alignment or some kind of synergy there. If you're standing waiting to get your lunch or something and there's someone standing next to you, you could say, oh, what's been your favorite presentation so far? And, that can start a conversation too. Zoom can be really challenging. I think it can be really challenging to kind of network, and, I hope that we get a chance to have a conversation after this. But even when you're just kind of waiting, or in a breakout room, for example, you could just say things like, oh, where are you based? And, what's happening there at the moment, and things like that. Contacting people online or via email, again, I would suggest saying, I really found something about your work really interesting, and this is how it aligns with my own research. And then finally, in social situations, you could be at like a conference dinner or something like that. Some really nice ways to kind of break the ice are things like, what are you reading at the moment? Or have you seen the Barbie movie, or whatever the latest movie is that everybody knows about? What podcasts do you listen to? That sort of thing. So just have these things at the ready if you do feel quite nervous and unsure when you have to actually walk into real life social situations. It might help you feel a little less anxious to know that you have a couple of things in your back pocket to really start a conversation. And you never know where these conversations will go. Another strategy which I really like, and which I've benefited from quite a bit myself, is rather than thinking, I want to connect with so-and-so, you're actually going to connect to people, right? External to you. So, for example, Amanda and Stephanie, I'm going to go, you know what, Amanda does really interesting research on this topic. Stephanie, you need to know Amanda, right? And so you actually connect other people. And there are some really great people at my university who do this super well. So it's actually really fun and really satisfying to do this kind of thing. It's almost like matchmaking, if you like. And you just never know what will come out of those types of introductions. So we have a professor in psychology here at UniSQ who's just really good at this. And she's always on the lookout for how to put people together. And she actually put me in touch with a couple of the clinical psychologists at UniSQ who work in the master's space and who are looking to kind of expose their students to complementary therapies, right? And she's, put me in touch with them because I work in the music and health and wellbeing space. And she also drew into that group a music therapist, fantastic music therapist from Brisbane. And I've actually never worked with a music therapist. And we're all together working on a new research project about introducing these clinical psych students to music and the creative arts as kind of complementary therapies, just to kind of raise their awareness of these things. And so this is Professor Amy kind of putting this team together, behind the scenes and connecting other people, and really great things can come from that. So that's another way of, actually helping other people build their networks, which I think is really, really important. I just wanted to say a point about introversion, and I do know that some people find a lot of this stuff quite challenging, if you're naturally an introverted person. I get that. I get that can be really challenging, particularly in, say conference situations where you're an ECR or a HDR and you feel a bit low on the totem pole. I think that it's really important, however, to always come back to that idea of you've got something to offer anyone, okay? You really do. You're building skills, you've got your own unique research interest, you've got your own unique skill set. So you're always going to have something to give to other people. And that's the important thing that you need to keep coming back to. Now, as introverts, sometimes it can be hard to kind of, put yourself out there. I really understand that, but you do have to somehow show up. So if that means for you, it's going to be easier to, say, write an article for the conversation, right, where you're putting your work out there and people are commenting on it and you're engaging in that way. and building relationships that way, then do that. But I suppose what I wanted to say about feeling introverted is that the principles do remain the same. It might just be that the mode of connection is more tailored to the way that you feel comfortable kind of connecting with other people. Okay, so we talked about structure, disciplinary, institutional, and external network. And we talked about some concrete strategies to make these relationships and build them and to strengthen them. And so I really want to encourage you to get started. And I like to think of this whole thing, this relationship building thing, as a choose your own adventure, really. You know, you get to choose who you reach out to. You get to choose who you want to really develop these relationships with. There's no rules around that, that's for sure. But I do think it's really important that you build relationships with somebody, because as an academic, as a researcher, as an ECR, it's very, very hard to do this work entirely on your own without these networks in place. So consistency is really key. Build these relationships over time. So remember what I said at the beginning, by the time you need a relationship, it's going to be too late to build one, because these relationships do take time to build and to evolve and to strengthen. My one last piece of advice is to always be professional. There'll be time to become more personal later as you get to know that person better. But I think your first impression always needs to be one of professionalism. So just last week, for example, I got a cold call email from someone asking about research opportunities. And they were asking, you know, can we collaborate on some research projects? And the sender's name displayed in my inbox as Daffy Duck. Right. And so, of course, I couldn't kind of get over that. Like, I was like, Daffy Duck, why is Daffy Duck sending me emails? You know, and the email was written okay, it was reasonably professional, but, you know, it's not a great look to send an email from a sender like Daffy Duck if you're legitimately trying to pitch yourself as a researcher and someone to be taken seriously. Okay, so here are a couple of the resources that I've drawn on to build this presentation today. So all of the ideas pretty much are the ideas of other people. I'm not an expert in networking by any, stretch of the imagination, but I have done it a lot. So I've really kind of bowel-birded my way through a bunch of these resources and picked out the best things, I think, from them to present to you today. So there's a book on the left there by Jane Kenway, Building Academic Networks. I have the copy right here. It's a little bit old, but it's actually probably about the only book I found that's specifically on this topic for academics. I want to really give a shout out to this book, The New Academic by Shelda Dubowski. She's a brilliant, she's actually gone into academic coaching these days, but this book kind of really lays it all out for you, everything about how to build an academic career. She has a whole chapter on relationship management, right, which is basically what we're talking about. And the other thing I wanted to point out was this Coaching for Leaders podcast, which is actually really for business leaders, but so much of the information on that podcast is really, really useful for academics and early career academics in particular, all about building relationships, how to demonstrate professionalism in your communication, how you present yourself, all that kind of stuff. So it's actually a great resource. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and it's always really weird to talk to the presentation slide and nothing else. So I'm hoping that people are there and have gotten something out of that, but I would love to hear any reflections on what I've said, or any challenges that you feel you might face trying to implement any of these ideas as well.
Thanks, Melissa. Do you want me to stop the recording so we can?
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you. Yes, Amanda Krause is